A warm welcoming you back to this our program, Think Tech Hawaii's Humane Architecture. This happening to be our 289th episode of the 14th time looking into a city that we recently get a lot of high rises from, not literally, but through the authorship of the architects and the kind of architecture they do over there, and we get the same here. So we're doing this here from around our not active volcano of Diamond Head with DeSoto Brown back in his Ossipoff designed childhood home, and myself in the Waikiki Grand in a second. Hey, DeSoto.
Good day, everybody, and good day, Martin.
Hi, DeSoto. Let's get the first slide up and talk about our patron of today, who happens to be from a little bit southwest of the city of Chicago. We're talking about in Galesburg, Illinois. And this is our birthday kid today, 82 years young. Congratulations. We like to say our mid-century modern master, Ron Lindgren, but in all fairness, we should also say our 3/4 through the 20th century master, DeSoto, right?
Yes, that's correct. Absolutely, more than 3/4.
So we put up here recent news from Ron. You want to start out with what else he's doing recently, please?
Well, Ron, pardon me, everyone. Ron Lindgren is an architect who practiced in the middle part of the 20th century into the later part of the 20th century. He's a good buddy of ours. And he spent his career working for Ed Killingsworth, who was the man who started a very important mid-century architectural firm in Long Beach, California. And one of the things that Ed Killingsworth worked on was Case Study House number 25. That is, case study houses are renowned by architectural historians and people who like architecture from the mid-century as being these wonderful Southern California examples of the entire genre. Ron has been asked to give presentations about these case study houses, particularly case study house number 25, designed by Ed Killingsworth. And the new owners of the house, the current owners of the house who fixed it up, had a party, and Ron was there to speak to people about Ed Killingsworth. And one of the things that's always impressed me very much with these houses is that the front door is 17 feet tall. And I just marvel at the idea that you could build a 17-foot tall door that not only continues to function, but that a single human being can open and close. It's made of aluminum, but still, that is an engineering feat in addition to an aesthetic feat for creating a magnificent entry to the home. So Ron is found a second career now as an architectural historian and somebody who gives presentations. And I think that sounds wonderful. And I am continuing to wish that I was able to be there in Long Beach in person to hear him at one of these gatherings talking about the architectural career of his mentor, Ed Killingsworth, in the actual place that Ed built.
That being said, dear hosts of these events, please make this possible and make it accessible for us via Zoom. We're pretty familiar to that technology as we're doing the show here. And that house you were talking about is called the Frank House, as it says here, or the case study house number 25, as it says here. And what does this all have to do with us in Hawaii? A lot, because that was laying the foundation for Conrad Hilton before most everyone knew him, and he was attracted to these houses and then trusted Ed Killingsworth to do a couple of small kind of motor lodges to then find sufficient confidence in saying, hey, do you want to do the first Hilton hotel, which became the Kahala Hilton that we know. And we see at the show quotes at the top right, too, when we had sort of an informal getting together and having Ron give us a fantastic, intel insight into it. And now this is all coming full circle, because you see in the second from the top one, you see Rich Lowe and Bundit Kanistakon who happened to know the owners of Ron's masterpiece, which he did as a junior partner within the firm because he's the next generation. So Ed Killingsworth then got him on board. And Larry Stricker. And so these young guys were carrying on the tradition and doing that, staying true to themselves for half of a century, very impressively. And so Bundet wants to put something that you had witnessed and Anne Moranaga had been doing with Ron, an oral history about more himself, so the person behind all that. And then Bundet has the great idea to put this on his Chen Gallery website, but also make it a physical event in the Halekulani that he is currently working on. So this is all very exciting, and hopefully sufficient birthday greetings again to you, our friend, who has done blessed us here on the island with so much tropical exotic beauty. So congratulations again, Ron. Next slide, because that gets us straight back to Chicago here in sort of a compilation of what we've been talking about last time, DeSoto. And we just, as always, got in Senator Stanley Chang's newsletter saying condo prices just recorded. They're just above $500,000. And houses, single-family houses, are back to over $1 million. So there's another article that says brain drain, young people leaving the island. So this is the upmost challenge here. And again, we've been talking about, we share a lot that actually in the old structures, there's some little, niches here and there where, you maybe could still afford one. While in the new ones, there's another quote here from Reddit at the top right up there about a gentleman we don't like to talk about for several reasons. And it says, you guys should see the Trump property condos, 550 square feet, condo for $180K, which sounds like a steal. And then comes the catch, $2,500 months of HOA fees, which then makes it impossible through this hidden thing, right? And this is making up for me blanking on the movie I was watching. So here's the one, Things Are Tough All Over, which gets that kind of sad connotation about this situation of being not affordable. Denby Fawcett, who we also both know fairly well, has also done a great article that Stanley is basically quoting that says, for whom is affordable housing here on our island? Certainly not for low-income families. So it's all around the same thing. And so, we talked about skinny towers, some of them maybe still, and studios are basically, the article also breaks it down what actually wage-wise with like a 12 hours, it's going $12 per hour, right? The minimum wage that's been raised to that, and every year should go a little higher. That actually makes you only be able to afford $500 rent, which is what I paid in the desert of Arizona, right? And so now here the average of a studio is $1,650. So there's this huge gap, right? And we were looking at that in the Marina City there happened to be still some catches there to be made. And my colleague Carla Salralta used to live there. And now I heard she went to the Gold Coast here. Good for her. But what I saw out there is that it's adjacent to you, that it's hard to find anything affordable in that area. So we just want to keep that all in mind here when we're talking. And going to the next slide, or here at the bottom of this slide here, you see Miami Vice as us pointing out to skinny towers standing on one leg, almost like flamingos, balancing. So cities are also, stages for, TV series, as Miami has Miami Vice. We used to have a Y50 and Magnum PI, and one of them we still have as a reboot, right? And things we don't want to talk about because, again, there is a Trump Tower in Chicago and we have a Trump Hotel here. in Honolulu that we don't want to talk about, but we somehow can't get around. Here's another weirdo person here that we also don't want to have as much to do with. That's Kanye West, and he's here portrayed with one of his running for president back then in 2020 here, which is painted on this building here, which is a building that did not make us into the, we should say, we've been using, when we sent me out there, we used the Dome Guide of Chicago that was just out. And the author cleverly decided to do it from the late 70s up to today, kind of an easy way out. And it was hot off the press, and it wasn't officially out. So, Philip and Björn gave it to me as a PDF, and I had to swear to not sell this on the web, which I didn't do, right? But I want to say we want to encourage, because we're working, trusted and charged by them to write about our city, that you should also use it actually to not just, go from building to building that they choose, but actually then find buildings in between on the way that you would choose. And this is one of mine here from a firm I had never heard of. That's the beauty of it, Hausner and Maxai. And they did this building there, and they are, when you Google them, they're mostly known for talking hotels in their heydays. We have a Hyatt here. We actually, Don Hibbert was opting for, we should have the Hyatt Towers in there, which we had some discussion and we finally agreed on. And so they did the first Hyatt in Illinois back then in 1960, which we see at the very bottom right. And the nickname for that is the Purple Hotel, for the reason very obvious. As you can see, there are these purple bricks basically set in, and you read some pretty scandalous stories there, from having thrown pretty wild parties and stuff like that. And also Chicago, the legacy of Al Capone and mafia. There was a deadly shooting in the parking lot, all these. And then sadly, the whole thing got torn down at the very end. It did not happen to this building here of them. And one thing we want to share, the criteria that we have that most of the books don't have, is climatic and cultural appropriateness. And climatic appropriateness means you always have to keep in mind, where is the sun? So I give you orientation for this building here. To the right, further than where Connie is, printed on there, is the lake. The lake is to the east of us. So north is where the glass tower is. So then that facade with these horizontal ledges there is facing south, which is good, right? Because that's giving shading. It also has that where it's actually not needed to the north, which is the picture at the top left. But there you can say it also rains and snows, right? So it's like eyebrows that it gives to that. And which is actually great, just not the Connie thing on there, based on our political and ethical where we stand, but that this facade is opaque because that's the low morning sun, and that's being kept away. So that building is a true, basically pre-fossil modern master thing. But then one thing happens to these old buildings, which we get to pimp them in these days, and we start to remodel them and make them chic. This is an apartment tower that's highly, gentrified, and it's not that affordable anymore. By the way, it has studio units in there, but they're in like the 2K or so range. And then I found a detail similarity to a building here that, after also some discussion, we decided to have in there, which is my neighbor here, which is the Queen K. And I want you to reiterate, I had hardly ever heard you being so upset about certain ways of renovating buildings, and that's relative to the detailing that we show at the very bottom left, which is exactly the same what that building here has. And share that with the audience, DeSoto.
I believe you're talking about the plastic plants.
Yeah, and the plastic wood.
And plastic wood. One of the incredibly bizarre things is that there are these living walls. There's sort of an architectural trend or an interior decoration trend to create what are called living walls, in which you have walls which are vertical, which have plants growing on them. And that means that the medium to grow the plants that their roots are in is actually attached to the wall as well. Now, this is not something that you just throw together quickly. It needs a lot of care. You have to keep the plants growing and so forth. Well, what people have done is to turn this living wall concept into something that is completely artificial, in which you put plastic fake plants on a wall. And that is the absolute antithesis of what a living wall is supposed to be. A living wall is supposed to be creating oxygen. It's supposed to be taking in carbon dioxide. It's supposed to be helping us animals like humans live. Plants and animals do the same, do these complementary things. We breathe out, they breathe in, etc. Well, if you're turning it into plastic, that is an abomination, because you're absolutely subverting and perverting what the living wall is supposed to be, turning it into something purely decorative that doesn't do anything. Yeah. That's why I get upset about this, because it's the opposite of what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and you know, you only find out once you get closer and you knock. It sounds like, you know, not sound as wood, but hollow as metal. And it's ironic that, you know, pretty far apart from each other in two different climates and cultures, you find that same really pathetic petroleum-based, hideous, you know, kind of detail. And also the architectural offices, unfortunately, I mean, this was G70 who renovated the Queen K Hotel, and they actually, even worse, to make it worse, they consulted you and you had advised them differently, and they only listened to you very little, which, again, it's not about, you know, who needs to listen to us all the time, but whatever you do, be inspired by doing it authentically, right? And not faking it. And even the big offices, this is already giving you a heads up that I'm going to quiz you on, which I continue to do on that firm that we also had here twice on the island. So coming up soon, DeSoto, you're warned. I give you a heads up. That's with the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel and the engineering school here on our islands, SOM. So
SOM.
Me having which I miss is doing tours, you know, flying over or driving over, which still from Nebraska, my home away from home. And then after that, Arizona, you could either fly or drive, but it's within reach. You know, for us, it's a way bigger trip from us here. But, you know, I'm missing that you tour a city with an emerging generation and you visit the firms. And SOM, you know, was also guilty in that regards, because down there at the second from the bottom right, you see as part of their material details they have out there, and that was in 2010 when I went there with the emerging generation. You see that stuff, you know, how it's there. It's this metal bended with this. I mean, you're used to this from in a more innocent way from the 70s and the 80s as the woodies, you know, on kitchen or bed. Actually, I have this behind me because this is the original interior from, you know, well, it's probably the first renovation from the 80s, and you had that on the woodies on the cars, right? But you wouldn't do this. See, the dog is really voicing itself and going against that, because your dog is the epitome of the natural, right, of the authentic. So you know, everyone should bark against that, right? Thank you.
Little did we know the dog would bark right on cue.
Yeah, and so next slide is going around the corner here, which you see the building. We just were, you know, in front of it at the bottom. You see at the bottom left there, that's the building. And then next to it is this glass building here. And again, orientation-wise, we told us that this is facing east. So they basically glazed it all, which is not so good. And this is a hotel. The other is a condominium building. It is, again, architecturally fairly, I mean, they use glazing all over, and it's actually a French architect, so I'm sympathetic with that. It's a neighbor of mine from back in Europe, and did architecturally a really good job having this all glass facade, and then some are opaque panels and some are transparent. But again, don't forget orientation. And around the corner, sort of like behind me, if I would walk towards the lake, you go by this building that has this pre-patinated copper panel cladding. And that's by one of the other big corporate firms in America, by Gensler. and it's actually a church. And both of us are not that acquainted with that sort of sacred typology because we're not members of any of these. But the material we know, DeSoto, from actually me next door here, because there's the Catholic Church by the architect McLaughlin, who Bundit was surprised that he is the one that designed the building that he is in, that he lives in. And so we had, after a discussion, not chosen the building to be in the book because it doesn't seem to be so easy breezy and naturally ventilated. And the material, pre-patinated copper, we know from me having shared, we have used it for one of the tram stations, basically, as a cladding there. And this is truly basically a rain screen, right? And a sunscreen, if you want. So this is not a structural material. It's something you throw over, and then you need insulation behind. And Chicago, again, for the cold winter, to keep you warm, and as here all the time, to keep you cool. So you got to have cool roofs. You got to have insulated roofs, as Howard Wick in Cold Green always reminds us, right? And again, this is the southern fenestration, which you can say, okay, mostly, in the Great Plains is actually mostly the cooling loads in the summer are actually bigger than the heating loads in the winter time. And so same as it is here, right? So that way you see that big glass facade on the side there that is once again facing the lake, which is not such a good idea. So again, dear architects, always consider orientation, and then fenestration relative to that. Next slide.
Before we go away, I just wanted to ask, and this is something that I'm assuming a layer of metal such as this is going to conduct a lot more heat. It will heat up faster and it will radiate heat faster than would most other types of materials. And that is something that's very important for us here. And so the St. Augustine's Church in Waikiki, for example, has this kind of a roof, which I would think during the day would be conducting a lot of heat into the interior. Yeah. And then it also, I'm assuming, would be conducting heat out during the winter when it's colder outside. That heating from the inside would be radiating out into the cold. So there are considerations there for the interior and the livability of that I think go beyond necessarily just how attractive it might look, for example.
Absolutely. And then in addition to that, DeSoto, like from the sort of, indigenous mindset where you took materials that you were able to gather from around yourself, right? This is metal, and we don't have any mining ingredients in below us that you could, mine that material from. That's different on the mainland, and that's different in Europe, right? The material we used, oddly enough, the limitations of globalism, which I think is also a good thing, which I just found out yesterday, but that's for another show, that the manufacture of what we use there, even the name says KME is Kabel Metall Europa, so Cable Metals Europe. And for some, reasons, they're not able to make business here in the United States. They were once complaining about, but obviously, Gensler found here, an American manufacturer. Again, the material, I'm not so familiar with the geological circumstances in the area, and like if it would be like a, living building challenge 500-mile radius sourced from, I doubt it. But again, shipping it here, is way worse because it comes from somewhere in mining, you should really consider, and then shipping it here, you're absolutely right. So for that reason, that church is more, it's a nice mid-century modern building, don't get us wrong, but based upon the criteria of not just being cool on the visual sense, but also literally and keeping you cool, it falls short versus Bundit's building he lives in, right? Next slide. We have a continuous contribution from the exotic escapism expert Susanne, who sent us that in the German Architectural Museum, DeSoto, that should remind you, because Dean Sakamoto had the Osipov exhibit touring there a while ago. So now it's this SOS Brutalism exhibit that we had been pointing out in one of the first shows. So that's been many, many years ago. So it finally made it there, as we show quote at the top left. And this is, I'm standing talking Germany in front of the stairs of a museum. So you were interested in that one, by another German architect. That's the Museum of Contemporary Art by Kleihues, who has passed away in a higher age, and it's continued by his son. And as a practice, the more on the formalist side, I have to say, this is also a nice sort of a neoclassical building, as we would say it. But what I don't want to talk about, because it makes me like almost speechless, is that stuff on the top, on the left there, which is a children's hospital, very kind of postmodern, throwing materials and pattern together in sort of a playful, I guess, but that's okay for what children's do, but not what we should do as architects. But another building here that has not made it into the book, but I was very fascinated by, being a brutalist building, not a tropical, because this is not in the tropics here. And this is a building that's for the headquarters of the American Dental Association here. And that is from a firm that our mid-century mentor, Bill Chapman, our co-author in the book, one of the firms he always mentions is one of the biggest, traditional firms. That's Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. And they trace as way back as to the exhibition there, the White City they had. But little to me known is that they, stayed afloat until the mid-60s and basically did this pretty nice brutalist building here, which is, has these vertical fins, and they're kind of, rounded then in plan. And so it gives us sort of this curvy linear sexiness to it. And again, orientation, they always also shade, because the glass is recessed. And as you always put it so perfectly, the nature of brutalism is minimizing transparency and maximizing opacity, right? So this building here does it pretty well. And in the few minutes left, DeSoto, some hot news here to that regards. Next slide, from back to us in Honolulu here, because this is shame on me, in our list, 150 buildings we agreed on. I stumbled over that and missed out on that, and actually did for even before. And it's sort of like very ironic, because we used to go into a similar building where the Think Tech Studio first was at Pioneers Plaza. And now you, Ash, are in a sibling building on Bishop Street. And this is a third one in that one that I had been in when Docomomo had a reception by Noel, where they had the daughter of Harry Betoya speaking to us. And I was in the building, and we have to also show this awesome cast in place mural that's in the lobby. That's absolutely awesome. And it's by one of our favorite architects, Steve Au, that we've been doing so much coverage. So how in the world could we/I have missed out on that? But luckily, it's not too late. Thanks to, again, there is Stanley Chang here. And also thanks to Bundit and to Jay, who brought us back this to attention here, because what's happening in the building is a trend that we're happy to hear, that they're converting basically former office space into much needed housing in downtown Honolulu. And what really blew me away, DeSoto, as you know, having the emerging generation actually currently being on that and going back to, and I have to ask you now, this is giving you a heads up, if you can please be in our review, which is on May 1st, which happens to be a Monday, which I remember you are able to take time off your overtime, so hopefully you can do that. So here, it's basically the interior picture at the bottom left is so awesome, because here we see it is an exoskeleton that, we've been talking about, the one that we've been doing, the school diner that we see at the show quotes at the top right around there, that is an exoskeleton. And we said we should do this here more often, and we have been overlooked, but luckily not too late that Steve has been doing this here, because there is no additional peripheral column grid on the exterior. There's just the core that you barely see down there. And then there is that structural skin of concrete fins. And how awesome is that? And now we're saying, in studio, we're saying, knock that glass out as well. And sort of in the semi-real world, I would point out to that German, there's this nationalist little thing in there, glass jealousy evolving Glasbau-Hahn company, where these thermally perfected, glass jealousies and put them in. And you're basically in business. This has to be in the book for all these reasons said. And I guess we are at the end of our 30 minutes time slot. Sorry, I got so overly excited about. And so I let you talk about what you have to say about that, but we have to wait until next week when we see each other again, us together. And then the week after, we're going to be together with Matt. Yep. So until then, please stay breezy, easy, and easily breezy wherever you are, and in different ways, obviously.
True.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching Think Tech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.